Hello and welcome back to Transitional Leadership. I am Kelly Hearn, and today we are talking about leading change. We are talking about leading change so that you can get more buy in with less effort by focusing on one key demographic in your business. Now, why are we focusing on change right now? This isn't the beginning of the year, this isn't even the beginning of the quarter. But this seems to be the time in the calendar where everything changes. This is the time of year that we just throw out the plan for some reason. This is how it has worked for as long as I have been working either in or adjacent to the corporate sector. But in the early months of the year, you tend to see people closing up projects, putting a nice little bow, buttoning up everything that they were focused on in the year prior. Maybe it's running reports, maybe it's putting together presentations that show what you did, but they are just kind of putting those last finishing touches on the prior year's projects. Then you get into the initiatives and the strategies for the year to come, right? So then we're in kind of February, March timeline, and you're developing what you want this current year, this coming year to look like. So for right now, or earlier in this year, we were planning out what 2025 would look like and getting that strategy out to the entire company. Then in April, everyone is focused on getting that work done. It tends to be in April that everyone is really kind of hitting their stride and they're feeling like this year we are going to make a difference. We are going to hit our mark. And then you get slapped with early May where your people start getting frustrated because they're not seeing progress. Your boss starts to hit you from the side with different priorities and fires that came up that they need you to address. Meanwhile, you are kind of standing with a foot in both camps, keeping your people focused and engaged, keeping your boss happy by putting out fires, and trying to keep a focus on that overarching strategy that you had while there's just chaos around you. Now, I hate to say this, but 2025 is going to be the year that we are leading change, and it is even more difficult. Now, I'm sorry. I know that's probably not what you were wanting to hear right now, right? Why would it be harder in 2025? And I have to tell you, it is not necessarily that 2025 specifically has something wrong with it. It's not that 2025 is the problem. It's that we have been seeing some trends leading up to this year that will make leading change even more difficult. So, what is that exactly? Now, first of all, in each of the last 2 years, the country as a whole has lost more than 700,000 jobs each year. There were 700,000 jobs or more cut in each of the last 2 years. And if you look back for 15 years, 2024 had the most job cuts in any single year except for one. What year would that be? 2020, right? When the world was shifting and change was inevitable, it was just kind of forced down everybody's throat. That was the only other time in 15 years that we have lost more jobs than in 2024. Now, if you compare jobs created and jobs lost, it isn't the only stat that is significantly looking at those 2 years, 2020 and 2024. If you were around last week, we talked about how the employee engagement also had similar drops. We saw a drop last year was the second time that we saw a drop in engagement in the last 12 years, which is the total amount of time that Gallup has been doing this holistic study. They've been looking at it since 2009. So in 2020 and in 2024, we saw record amounts of jobs being lost. Again, in these 15 to 12 years that we've been measuring this data by Forbes and by Gallup. And we saw record drops in engagement. Now, those two stats have something else in common for 2024. And that is that both stats are largely driven by the management level. That means the leaders within your organization are seeing massive job cuts and they're seeing massive loss in engagement. Now, That is a stat that you can understand, right? If we're losing jobs in a certain area, of course, those that are still in that role are going to be impacted and their level of engagement is going to be impacted. But again, what does that mean for 2025? Well, it means that we are kind of starting from behind the eight ball. We have people who want to do a good job for their organization, but they're feeling the stress of potentially their job being lost too. They're feeling the pain of losing their peers and their friends. And now they are being asked to make even more changes and do even more with less. That does not mean that you can't effectively lead significant change this year. You can influence behaviors and generate change that will have lasting effects for 2026 and even beyond. And you can make an impact while working on your regular scheduled hours, right? Not putting in 60, 70 hours per week and maintaining these enriching relationships with your team that you want as well. You are always leading change. So, yes, let's find a way to do it within our normal hours and by actually engaging and enriching the relationships that we have, right? Because whether you are a senior leader guiding your company through an acquisition or you're a frontline manager who's just introducing some new metric that your team has never measured against before, you are leading change. Your job isn't done just because you've identified the perfect retention ratio. It isn't done because you brokered the best deal for that acquisition. That's actually when the hard work begins. Because once you set the goal, your initiatives have to shift and you have to focus on things like listening, empowering, and prioritizing in order to see success in the long term. The good news is you don't have to go it alone. This video is going to show you how to engage your leaders first so that they can actually hit the goal for you. Now, don't shut this off just because you are a manager or a supervisor who doesn't have a large number of formal leaders reporting to you. If you have a team of individual contributors, you have leaders within that team. And very likely, even as I said that sentence, you could visualize the face of the people who are the leaders. Those are the people that I want you to engage with first, because those are the people, whether they hold a formal leadership title or they just happen to be the people with the quickest buy in who always have your back, those are the ones who are going to bridge the gap in any new change that you are initiating, despite the fact that you are having even bigger challenges doing it this year. So, I'm going to give you 3 ways to engage those specific leaders on your team first. Now, if you've been on this channel for long, you know that I'm going to say that communication is your number one job. But today, with our leaders specifically, we're going to focus on one particular part of communication, and that is listening. Listening is a critical skill for leaders. And if you're a senior leader or even a middle manager, you're tempted to think of listening as listening to all of the individual contributors. And if you are a supervisor or a more frontline manager, you're tempted to think of listening as listening to that squeaky wheel. The thing is, when you listen specifically to the squeaky wheel, or when you listen only to the individual contributors, you end up focusing on that one specific need that that one specific person or group has. You don't take a higher level look to make the biggest impact for the most people, which is what you're going to have to do in 2025 if you're going to lead any sort of successful change. So, when we listen specifically to our leaders, and we get really curious with them, we have a better understanding of what is going to make the biggest impact overall. Your leaders need your support and they need to feel like they are an integral part of the process. You can't just give them the to do list. You can't just oil that squeaky wheel. You need to engage those people who are going to help you bridge that gap. You're going to listen early, listen often, and listen with your eyes. Now, I want to give you an example of this. And it's an example where the person actually made the mistake and then was able to kind of regroup and fix things on the back end, just like so many of us need to do so very often. So, this example is a chief operating officer, and she was taking a pretty traditional approach when she found out that there needed to be layoffs across the board. One of the layoffs impacted her and her teams directly because it was her second in command. So, it was a pretty integral role that she needed to work with. She, again, taking this traditional approach, went very tactical very quickly. She started redistributing duties that that person would have had to every other person and team within her department. Almost instantly, some of the most important metrics that overall department, the teams that she was working on, they started to lose traction on the stuff that was just overall basic for them. And she didn't understand why. So she took a step back and she listened and she realized that she was going too fast. So she set up a listening session for those leaders within her team. And within that, she could see everything she needed to see on their faces right away, honestly. They were worried. They were terrified that they were going to make a mistake on one of the new pieces of responsibility that she had given them, something that her second in command would have previously done. They were so worried, in fact, that they were neglecting the basics. Once she started listening fully, then she met them where they were at. She listened to understand their specific concerns and asked them what they needed. Then she could be transparent about what dropping the basics was doing to the organization. She funneled it all up to help them see why those basics were so foundational, why it was so important, and why it was completely unacceptable that they were getting dropped. Then she could leverage their recommendations and bring about some solutions that would benefit everybody. So I don't know if you heard it there or not, but she actually listened multiple times throughout that process. She first noticed that there was a problem, right? She saw that she had made a mistake. She dug in, she set up time so that she could just sit and be quiet and listen to them and what their concerns were. And then, after having a better understanding of the concerns, she asked so she could listen again to what their solutions were. And that's honestly a great segue into this next point because she was respecting their expertise so very much. Respecting the expertise that your leaders have means that you aren't micromanaging them. When you trust them to do the work that you hired them to do, you are communicating to them that they have value, that they have worth within the organization, and that they're not just clicking boxes and entering data into cells. So, supporting your leaders does not mean micromanaging them. It means giving them the space to do what they do best. So, just like we saw with our COO, she was trying to get in and focus on how all of the work needed to get done. But instead, she realized that that wasn't going to work, and she needed to shift her perspective to encourage the leaders to get creative and use their own strengths. Gallup has seen time and time again the massive impact that leaders have on those that they manage. And when you show that you have confidence in their abilities to meet the challenge, it will vastly increase the likelihood that they will. I know I've said this before, but there is a 70% connection between the direct manager and the individual. It is not meant to be that you pour everything down. You create the engagement with the individual by working with them in a symbiotic relationship. So you set the direction as the leader, and they organize it or carry it out, depending on what level of the organization you're in. So you need to remind them how much you trust and value that they will do their piece of that puzzle well. So I was on a podcast recently, and the host was taken aback by my perspective on this. because I told him that I was lucky enough in my first corporate management role to have never done the work before. Meaning I was promoted from within the company, but not from within the team that I was now managing. I was supposed to be responsible for multiple job functions. I want to say 6 or 7 different job functions, none of which had I ever done. There was no way for me to assume that I knew more about the technical aspects of the job than any of the people who were doing the job. So when I wanted to change something, say our quality program, for example, I wanted to completely turn it on its head. All I was able to do, I was fortunate enough that all I was able to do was set the vision. I had to get curious with my audit experts. I had to ask them how we would achieve that. And then I had to give them autonomy and allow us all to collaborate because I could only give the why, maybe a little bit of the what, but I could only give the why and a portion of the what. I could not determine how to execute it. Now, if you are promoted from within the team, if you came up because you were really good at executing on the work, it doesn't mean you can't be successful in this. It doesn't mean that you can't be successful in supporting and respecting the expertise of the people around you. It just means that you need to section off that part of your brain that feels like you know best in the details and get really curious about the value that the rest of your specific leaders can bring. And if they are leaders on your team, they will happily share their expertise and come with solutions to these problems. All right, we are zipping right along. So let's talk about number 3. The third one is to prioritize the workload. Because no matter the change, it could be layoffs, it could be reallocation of work, it could be expansion of a new product, it doesn't matter. When you change, your standards must adapt. You can't immediately see the same progress if you have reduced resources. And when you make a change, you have reduced resources, even if it's just mental capacity. I'm a runner, so let's think about it this way. If I run 2 miles every day for a number of months, I might get fast at running those 2 miles. I might average a 9-minute mile or an 8-minute mile for those 2 miles, right? I can do 2 miles in 16 minutes. Now, let's say that I decide I want to work towards running 8 miles. Is it reasonable to expect that I would run those 8 miles with an average of an 8-minute mile? Absolutely not, because I am using the same amount of resources that I've already trained for to do the 2 miles that I regularly do. And now I'm pushing it and I'm expanding it. If my priority is to go 5 miles, I need to be okay with the fact that it's not going to take me the same amount of time. In time, my legs will get stronger, my lung capacity will get bigger, and I will be able to get to those 8 miles in 8 minutes a mile, maybe. But it certainly won't happen from one day to the next. All that to say, with time, your leaders will improve and they will be able to hit all of their marks that they've always hit while getting these new responsibilities, these expanded job roles. They will be able to hit all of them in stride, but it is not going to happen day one. They need time to grow their muscles, to grow new skills, to have the people following them learn how to do these new tasks and get really efficient at them as well. You and they will get stronger. It just will take some time. So you have to be incredibly clear on what the priorities are so that you can truly prioritize what needs to be done. That creates focus, it creates results, it creates this renewed hope for what the collective team can do. And missing the need for clear priorities will cause frustration and confusion and missed goals on multiple sides. Does this sound familiar as well? Let's think back to our COO for a moment, right? She expected that 8-mile run, but at that 2-mile pace. Now, she shared what needed to happen, but she didn't prioritize any of it. She just put all of her emphasis on the new work. So naturally, everyone assumed that what was new was a priority. But following the listening session, she got to get great ideas from her team, and she used their expertise and her understanding of why we were making the changes to get incredibly clear. Now, what did that look like in that case? She was armed with the feedback. She had the technical expertise. She could share what was critical, what was important, and what was a nice to have, both in terms of it getting done at all and in terms of being perfect at it, right? Some things require a different level of perfection, and other things, it's okay if they come in at an 80%. So she and her team removed work that was redundant. So just by looking at it and taking a second to do that, they identified that some things just didn't need to get done. Fantastic. Eliminate it. That freed up at least 2 hours a week from each of the leaders on her team. They also identified that there were inefficient processes and there were people on the team that were looking for opportunities to grow. What a great marriage. That is a match made in heaven. Inefficient processes and people who want to grow in their abilities. She could have them take on those processes and clean them up. Now, here's the cool part. Within 3 months, they had absorbed all of the work and they were more efficient than they had been with a full time employee taking it on. Now, what happens when you lead change right this year? Let me give you just one more example. Now, this was an organization where one of the top leaders was avoiding having one on ones because she just felt like there were too many changes, too many projects, too many things that she had to keep her fingers on, that she did not have time to spend an extra 8 hours a month talking to the leadership team. They already had leadership meetings, right? Where the whole group of them got together. They already saw each other every single day. Why couldn't she just talk to them in passing? Now, she did reluctantly try them for an hour every month, right? With each one of her leadership staff. And by the second round, so by the second month, she had completely changed her tune. She realized that having an hour with her office manager meant that she could completely balance the workload seamlessly. An hour a month with her lead trainer meant that she could fully delegate onboarding. It didn't have to be this open loop in her brain, but she felt like she was completely in the loop on what was going on. Dedicated time with her supervisors meant that they could keep the main thing. And it freed up so much capacity, not only in her time, but also just in her bandwidth, because she was able to communicate those changes and hand it off to the leaders that she was already relying on. It starts with training those leaders on the basics, admittedly. We talked a lot about that last week, so I will have the link below for you to click on that and rewatch that one if you need to. Then continued development to get those basics into practice every single day. We know it is that consistency that makes a difference. Cultivated repetition creates mastery. And yes, it will take time, but it's the linchpin that's making the whole system work. So we're okay with dedicating a little bit of time to see a huge payoff down the road. This is how you go from my plate is overflowing, I cannot handle one more thing, to feeling seamlessly balanced with projects fully delegated and having a finger on the pulse of everything that you're responsible for. And that is what you want, isn't it? Okay. I hope that this was helpful for you today. Please like and share if you know someone else who this would be beneficial for. And I will see you in the next.